this is the quadratic formula. You use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation. But does this look a little bit harder to factor than factoring? If it can factor, it's usually a little bit easier to solve by factoring. And so we usually just save the formula for those things that cannot be factored. Now, we're not doing the whole formula today. We are just doing the part of the formula called the discriminant. That does not say discriminate, it is discriminant. And this part of the formula is the discriminant. This part of the formula that lives under the square root sign is the discriminant. And what's this A's and B's and C's that it's talking about? Well, it's the A's and B's and C's that we have been doing for several weeks now to use the quadratic formula to find the discriminant. Also, you have to have standard form, and your equation has to be equal to 0. Before you can find the discriminant, before you can use the quadratic formula, you have to be in standard form, and you have to be equal to 0. So on our first example, before you can use the quadratic formula, you have to have standard form equal to 0. Do I have standard form equal to 0? So then I need to subtract 3 from both sides. And then what is my A going to be equal to? And what is my B going to be equal to? -5. Signs are important. What is my C going to be equal to? And the discriminant is B squared minus 4AC. That's a piece of the quadratic formula. So that's what the discriminant is. So what is my B? Not the x, just the numbers. -5 squared minus 4AC. Now, if you're using a calculator, and if you put -5 squared in your calculator without parentheses, it will tell you the answer is -25. It is not telling you the truth. -5 times -5 is what? Positive or -25? This number right here must always be a positive number. But I'm just warning you, some of these, a lot of times we use a calculator to figure out the discriminant because these numbers can get pretty big. And if you put that in your calculator without the parentheses, the calculator will lie to you about what your answer is, because you have not entered it in the calculator correctly. If you enter it in the calculator without the parentheses, you're telling it -5 squared, -25. But that's not what I want. I want the whole -5 squared. -5 times -5 is +25. I usually just do this part in my head so that even if I'm using a calculator on the rest of it, so that the calculator doesn't lie to me about the sign. Now here I'm going to multiply the 4 times the 2 times the 3. But this negative times this negative is going to make a, and what's 4 times 2 times 3? 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is? This is the discriminant. So what? Well, here's the importance of the discriminant. The discriminant is the number underneath the square root sign. Is this a perfect square number? So that means when I work out the quadratic formula on Monday, that's going to give me a whole number answer. That means that I will have 2 real, rational roots. Well, what does all that mean? Real means that there's not going to be an I in the answer. The definition of rational is any number that can be put in the form of a over b, where b is not 0. Any number that could be put in the form of a fraction. It could be a fraction or a whole number. Can you put a whole number in the form of a fraction? Can I make the whole number 5 into a fraction? So it is rational. And so what would be an example of something that is not rational? Yes, pi. And also any number that cannot be simplified. And for our purposes, the irrational number we're going to be concerned with is these non-perfect numbers. So that means Monday, when I solve the whole quadratic formula, if this is a perfect square, I'm going to get 2 answers. These answers are not going to have I in it. They're not going to have a square root in it. Okay, another new word. What's a root anyway? Well, I actually thought root was an old-fashioned word that we were going to get rid of, but somehow it keeps coming back. I guess there's enough of us old teachers that like the old terminology. When you solve by factoring, you get a solution, right? That's the same thing as a root. A root is the same thing as a solution. A solution can also be called a 0, because we get the solutions by putting the equation equal to 0. And we're going to learn when we get to the graphing part, that these solutions that we find are the x-intercepts on the graph. So all of these words mean the same thing: roots and solutions and zeros and x-intercepts. Yes, I know it would be less confusing if we had one word and we didn't call it 4 different things when it's all the same thing. But they didn't make me in charge of the vocabulary. So a root's the same thing as a solution, is the same thing as a 0, and the same thing as the x-intercept. The only difference is that when we have an x-intercept, we will write it in the form of a point. Okay, back to our discriminant. 2. Okay, we've got x squared equals 6x plus 20. Before I can figure out anything, I have to have standard form equal to 0. Now, I could move this to the right or these to the left. I don't like my a to be negative, and so I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides, so that all of this will cancel out over here and have a 0 on this side. I don't want the a to be negative. Yes, it will make my other terms negative, but I just can't get around that. So what is my a? No, the a is just the 1. What's the b? And the c? And the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. The discriminant is this number squared minus 4ac. This number right here, when you square it, will always be positive, because negative times a negative makes a positive. Negative times a negative makes a positive. 4 times 20 would be 80. Ten squared is 100. 11 squared is 121. Is this a perfect square number? If this is not perfect, then my answer will be 2 real, irrational roots. What does that mean? Real means there's not going to be an I. No I. Irrational means I am going to have a square root in my answer. I'm not going to be able to simplify it so that there is not going to be a square root. Root just means there's going to be, those will be the answers. The two answers, the two solutions, will be real and irrational. There's not going to be an I, but there will be a square root. And so when we solve these on Monday, it's helpful to know what kind of answer we're looking for. And so that's why we spend time looking at the discriminant. Number 3, 4x squared equals 4x minus 1. Before I can find the discriminant, before I can solve using the quadratic equation, this has to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides and add 1 to both sides. 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0, because all of that side zeroed out. The a is going to be 4, the b is going to be negative 4, the c is going to be 1. Now I'm not giving any explanation from that because we've been doing the ABCs since we've been doing factoring. My discriminant says b squared minus 4ac. Now, you notice me writing it down on every single problem, the b squared minus 4ac. If you write the formula down on every single problem, by the time you're done, you'll have the formula memorized. And so this is going to be negative 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. That was not a negative 1, that was a positive 1. This will be a 16. Now there's not another minus in there to cancel this one out, so this is going to be minus 4 times 4 times 1. 4 times 4 is, so what do I get when I subtract them? If this is 0, you will get 1 real, rational root. 1 real root. You will get 1 answer. It's actually called a double root. and you will get one answer, and it will be real. What does real mean? Well, how do you get an I in the answer anyway? So, negative 2x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Before you solve using the quadratic equation, before you can do the discriminant, you have to have it in standard form. Is this in standard form?
Yes, ma'am.
And the A is negative 2, and the B is 4, and the C is negative 6. So for B squared minus 4AC, we would have 4 squared minus 4 so this would be 16. Negative times negative would make a positive, but then when I multiply it by another negative, negative times another negative makes a negative number. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. If this is a negative number, then I will have 2 complex roots. What does complex mean? It's going to have an I in it.
How would you word that? Like, how would you put the I in there? Like the formatting?
I will answer that question on Monday. Because I want you to practice this a little bit. Okay, for summary, if you have a B squared minus 4AC that's equal to a perfect square number, you will get 2 real rational roots. If you have a B squared minus 4AC that's equal to a positive non-perfect number, it's positive, but it's not perfect, you will get 2 real irrational roots. Irrational means it's going to have the square root sign in it. It's not going to be able to simplify the square root away. B squared minus 4AC equals a negative number. You're going to get 2 complex roots. What does complex mean?
I.
It's going to have an I in it. And if the B squared minus 4AC equals 0, you are going to have 1 real root. 1 root, 1 answer, called a double root. It will have no square root sign. It will have no I in it.